Good afternoon. Welcome to the Council on Supply Chain Resilience. And I want to begin by thanking you, President Biden, for your leadership on these two issues that matter so much to every American: fixing supply chains and lowering everyday costs. As we prepare for the future in this body, it is important to reflect on how much has changed in a short amount of time. When President Biden first took office, the pandemic had led to the most profound and widespread set of disruptions to our transportation systems since 9/11, including enormous strain on our supply chains. We were paying more, we were waiting longer. We had about 100 ships bearing down on those West Coast ports, and some in the media, just about exactly 2 years ago, were saying that Christmas was going to be canceled. Christmas, of course, was not canceled. All through the year, President Biden had been challenging us to stay ahead of this issue and to be prepared to respond. And so, as tough as that season was, we wound up having an all-time record high of goods moving through America's ports, and people received their packages from major shippers with about a 99% on-time rate. That happened, of course, because President Biden brought together players from across different parts of the supply chain to address the biggest disruptions. Under his leadership, we built temporary inland container yards in places like Savannah and Oakland. We partnered with ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach to get containers moving more quickly. And most importantly, of course, supply chain workers stepped up. So thank you to the longshoremen, warehouse workers, rail workers, truck drivers, and everyone else who is a part of that. And now, as economists are assessing some of the reasons why inflation today is down so significantly compared to 1 year ago, many of them are pointing to the work that was done to reduce shipping costs and other supply chain inefficiencies. But there is more to do. Our goal is not to get American supply chains back simply to where they were before the pandemic, when they were fine on a good day, but brittle in the face of disruptions. Our goal is to make our supply chains more durably resilient and to bring more of their elements home to American soil to prevent disruptions and price spikes in the future. And that is why President Biden has created this White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience to institutionalize what we've done well and to focus on what remains to be done. From a transportation perspective, I want to briefly highlight 3 initiatives. First, through the President's infrastructure package, we are making unprecedented investments in America's supply chain infrastructure. We're helping expand capacity and resiliency at places like the Port of Miami, speeding the movement of goods with a new bridge being built at the Port of Los Angeles, adding 1,000 feet of wharf space and new rail cranes to the Port of Houston, and improving safety and goods movement at literally hundreds of ports, highways, and freight rail lines in between. And this is now being coordinated by our new multimodal freight office, also a creation of the bipartisan infrastructure law, so that our investments can have the biggest impact to move goods reliably and keep shipping prices down. Secondly, we consistently heard from private sector partners that to make the most of our physical infrastructure, we were going to need better data infrastructure. For example, an importer reported not being able to tell the fastest way to move goods. A port was losing visibility of goods outside of their gates, and a logistics firm didn't have enough notice to get their chassis to the right location where locomotives were available, all of which added up to wasted time and higher costs. So we launched FLOW, the Freight Logistics Optimization Works Initiative, to give actors across the supply chain unprecedented access to shared data. And today, even though this effort is still new, we can share some great progress. We've grown the number of participants to now include the 5 largest U.S. container ports, 7 of the largest ocean carriers, and some of the largest retailers, including Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and Lowe's. And participants are now beginning to use the data for the first time to inform decision-making that avoids bottlenecks, improves lead time, and better coordinates where trucks and chassis are most needed so that they can move goods more efficiently and, again, keep shipping costs down. And third, we are advancing the President's Trucking Action Plan, building new truck parking, improving working conditions for truck drivers, and opening new pathways for veterans to enter this critically important career. So while there is certainly much more work ahead of us, there is also a great deal of progress to build on. Thank you again, and it is now my great honor to introduce the person who has led this work, with discipline, with expertise, and with a constant focus on how we can use the tools of government to help people in everyday life. The President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Well, thank you very much, Pete, and it's good to see you all. We always talk about the big issues, the big things, but sometimes the big things work or don't work based on whether or not the little things are in place, the mechanics are in place. Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for being here today and help us launch this new Council on Supply Chain Resilience. I grew up in a family like many of you where when grocery prices went up, the price of a gallon of gas went up, there was a conversation at the kitchen table. I mean, literally, not figuratively. Those conversations have been going on at kitchen tables all across America for a while now. A conversation about whether we'd have enough left over at the end of the month for my dad to be able to, used to say, have a little bit of breathing room. Well, this past week, as Americans gathered around their own kitchen tables for Thanksgiving dinner, that was our goal, to give them a little more breathing room. And together, we made progress. You know, from turkey to air travel to tank of gas, costs went down. They went down. Now, to people making a lot of money, that doesn't matter a whole lot because the costs are relatively small compared to wealthy incomes. In fact, as a share of earnings this Thanksgiving, dinner was the 4th cheapest ever on record. I want you all to know that. I look at all the press, look at that. The press is particularly excited about that, I can see. But look, all kidding aside, that's not all. On Thanksgiving 2 years ago, 100 container ships were waiting in to dock in the ports. They were lined up, 100 long out into the ocean. This year, there were less than 10, meaning that today, as folks start their holiday shopping, shelves are stocked, meaning that if major appliances like a stove or a fridge broke down over Thanksgiving, you can replace it faster and 9% cheaper than did 2 years ago. These savings matter to so many families, especially at this time of the year. And they're no accident when it comes down to supply chains. Did you ever think we'd be talking this much about supply chains? No, but I'm serious. It's critical. Everybody's beginning to figure it out. The average person knows what we're talking about. We talk about supply chains. But when the supply chains were disrupted, we knew what trouble we had. Before the pandemic, supply chains weren't something most Americans thought about or talked about. But today, after years of delay in parts and products, everyone knows why supply chains are so important. That's why within my first month in office, I signed an executive order bringing supply chains home to get goods moving again. So it started here. We had the basic product here. Less than a year later, I signed the bipartisan infrastructure law to make a generational investment in every part of our supply chain, from our roads to our bridges to our ports to our airports to our internet. Less than a year after that, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act to grow the industries of the future right here at home, including electric vehicles and clean energy. And the CHIPS Act and the CHIPS and Science Act. How in God's name can you lead the world when you don't lead the world in science and development? To make sure we never experience another shortage of semiconductors. You know, America invented these chips. I know my staff is tired of hearing me say this in my cabinet, but these small computer chips the size of a fingertip, they affect nearly everything in our lives, from cell phones to automobiles, refrigerators. If you don't have them, you don't have those things. But over time, we went down from producing 40% of the world's chips to just doing 10%, but not anymore. All over the country, semiconductor factory companies are investing hundreds of billions, let me say it, hundreds of billions of dollars to bring chip production back home here to the United States. Over the last 3 years, all the leaders around this table, these two tables on my right and left, have also worked to lower costs for American families. From cracking down on foreign-owned ocean shipping companies that had raised their prices as much as 1,000% while racking up enormous profits, teaming up with truckers to create registered apprenticeship programs and move a record level of cargo around the country, to helping family farmers and family farms access fertilizer they need to grow food so many of us enjoyed in Thanksgiving. Folks, the result, today our supply chains are stronger than ever, with backlogs, bottlenecks, and shipping rates at a 25-year low. We've created 14 million new jobs, including 800,000 manufacturing jobs. And the unemployment rate has stayed below 4% for the longest period, longest stretch in over 50 years. And wages for working families have gone up while inflation has come down 65%, giving families a little more money in their pockets and a little more breathing room for this holiday season. But we know the prices are still too high for too many things, that times are still too tough for too many families. But we made progress, but we have more work to do. Let me be clear. To any corporation that's not brought their prices back down, even as inflation has come down, even as supply chains have been rebuilt, it's time to stop the price gouging and give the American consumer a break. Look, that's why I'm tackling junk fees, these hidden charges that companies sneak into your bill to make you pay more money just because they can, and you have no alternative. Junk fees take real money out of the pockets of average Americans. They can add up to hundreds of dollars, weighing down family budgets and making it harder for families to pay their bills. And they feel like they're being played for suckers, which they are. Over the past 2 years, my administration has taken steps to crack down on unfair and deceptive junk fees, from banking, hotels, retail housing, rental housing, cable networks, the internet, concerts, airlines, healthcare. For example, some banks and credit unions were charging as much as $30 for basic services like, want to check my balance, it costs you $30. Retrieving old bank records, it costs you that much money. Looking at the balance on a loan, they charge you that money. And we took action. The action we've taken, all that is now illegal. Illegal. Overdraft fees were also down nearly 50%, which means savings of average $150 for 33 million families across the country. And credit companies have been charging an average of $31 whenever you call and whenever you can't pay your bill on time, whenever you're late. You know, we're taking action to cut these fees as well to no more than $8 penalty. But you know, MAGA Republicans in Congress are pushing back on our efforts to end these junk fees. Folks, these refunds may not matter to the wealthy, but they matter to working folks in homes like the ones a lot of us grew up in. That's what this is all about, the American people. And today we're coming together to ask a simple question. What's next? What can we do? What must we do to keep making progress, to keep our supply chain stable and secure in the long term, to keep preserving that breathing room, a little bit of breathing room for American families for the season to come, no matter what challenges we face. And thanks to the folks assembled here around this table, we're making progress on two key fronts. First, we're doubling down on our work at home, starting right here, right now, with the launch of a new Council on Supply Chain Resilience. I'm charging this group to ensure that our supply chains remain secure, diversified, resilient, and into the future. I'm also directing my cabinet to create an early warning system that uses data to spot supply chains risks to our economic security, our national security, our energy security, and our climate security. And I'm proud to announce that I'll be invoking what's known as the Defense Production Act to boost production of essential medicines in America by American workers. Because you notice people had to get certain kinds of shots. It was not available. We had to get it overseas. Well, that supply chain is going to start here in America. Here in America. We're going to help assure American families have reliable access to medicines they need. Second, we're doubling down on our work with global partners. 2 weeks ago, I signed the first of its kind supply chain agreement with 13 countries in the Indo-Pacific. This agreement is going to help us identify supply chain bottlenecks before they become the kind of full-scale disruptions we saw during the pandemic. We all saw what happened then. Semiconductor supply chains from Asia and America from Asia to America shut down. If this agreement had been in place back then, we've been able to avoid that. And auto companies could not have had to lay off so many workers because they couldn't get the computer chips to build the vehicles. On top of this, I also signed the first ever presidential memorandum on worker rights globally, a move that's going to address forced labor, promote worker health, worker wages, worker unions, as we build out our supply chains. Because we know our progress depends on our workers, including union workers. They keep our supply chain secure and our economies moving. So we have to do more and empower them here at home and around the world. Fortunately, we've been able to push back on MAGA Republicans so far, but they haven't given up. They haven't given up. They still want to undo this progress we're making. They're proposing cuts in investments in roads, bridges, the internet, and high-speed internet, the very things that provided from anyway. They're across the board. And the cuts that could result in loss of jobs and infrastructure and in manufacturing. And they want to go back to the bad old days when corporations looked around the world to find the cheapest labor they could find, to send the jobs overseas, and then import the products back to the United States. Now, we're building the products here and exporting products overseas. We're not importing jobs. Folks, we're not importing anything other than what we make. We're making it here and we're sending it overseas rather than going to the cheapest place we can go to have it made. Bottom line, they want to make the whole supply chain more vulnerable. Their plan would offshore jobs, raise costs for seniors by repealing the insulin price reduction, the caps on out-of-pocket drug expenses, and the ability to negotiate lower drug prices that I secured in the Inflation Reduction Act. Their plan would cut Social Security benefits. I thought we had this, they agreed not to do this a couple times, but they're back at it. Benefits, average benefit cut would be 13% for people, by 13%, those would be cut. Their plan would also cut Medicare while providing more tax giveaways to the wealthy and the biggest corporations. And my predecessors, once again, God love him, call for cuts that could rip away health insurance for tens of millions of Americans in Medicaid. They just don't give up. But guess what? We won't let these things happen. Let me close with this. You know, we faced some pretty tough times in recent years. But in America, there's no surrender, there's no giving up, there's no stopping. America never gives up. I've long said, we're the only nation in the world that comes out of every crisis stronger than when we went into it, that crisis. I truly believe that 50 years from now, when historians are taking a look at this, looking back at this moment, when they look back on the work we're doing to build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, to strengthen the American supply chains and manufacturing workers all across the country, they're going to say that this was the beginning when America won the competition of the 21st century. I've never been more optimistic about our nation's future. We just have to remember who we are. You've heard me say it before, we are the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So folks, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I'm confident we can do it. We've done a lot already. So just keep at it. We're going to lower prices for average Americans all across this country. Thank you, thank you, thank you. See you.